Welcome to this week's End of Days Update, coming to you from Orlando, Florida. This is my man Jude, my grandson. We're coming to you every week to look at the different things that point to the coming of the Lord, specifically the signs of the Ezekiel 38 war. And because the rapture of the church is signless, but the second coming has tons of signs. We had such a great time with David and Scarlett Horton there in Holiday, Florida. This weekend, if you're anywhere up north of in Florida, we'll be at Impact Family Church. I think Jude's done with the broadcast, but we got a little more. Thank you, buddy. That's my sweetheart. If you can, we'll be there Sunday morning, Sunday night this weekend. We'll have a great time. We'll get into end times. It's amazing how many verses are written about what it would look like right before the coming of the Lord. That's why we get into this. I hear people say, why would you want to know so much about end times? Well, tell a quarterback that in the last couple of minutes of a football game. You're completely focused on the play clock because the plays are more crucial. So the things that we look at now are things that are surrounding Israel that are pointing to the coming of the Lord. You know, we have 50 some odd signs of the second coming, but man, you have all these literally nations getting in position like a football team getting on the field. When they line up for kickoff, you know you're about to kick off. So things are happening all around Israel. So let's pick up what's happened. Remember, Jesus rebuked them and said, hey, you can tell what the weather's going to be, but you don't know your hour of visitation. So he wanted them to know. And the main reason we get into all this is because he loves you so much. He wants you blessed. He wants you strengthened. He wants you encouraged. And when you hear about how close you are to seeing Jesus face to face, it actually should change your mood, I would think. So let's talk about what's happened around Israel. Man, this last week, 6 days in a row, you had incendiary balloons come up from Gaza right into Israel, caught the farms on fire again. Israel has radically retaliated a couple days ago, 3 days ago with fighter jets hitting munitions depots. And Hamas still said, we're going to keep doing this. So they've been basically saying in Israel, if you don't watch it, there's going to be another war with Hamas there on the southern part of Israel. So in the midst of that, though, you've got what happened this last week, what everyone's talking about, is the deal with the United Arab Emirates. This is the first basically Arab country besides Jordan and Egypt to make basically total in documentation or written peace with Israel. It's a pretty huge deal. These are all the things that are happening that are pointing to the coming of the Lord. Why is that a big deal? Because there's several nations that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 that don't attack Israel, and that's Egypt, that's Jordan, and that's Saudi Arabia, and now the United Arab Emirates. So it's kind of amazing to see the nations get in line with what the Bible said thousands of years ago. Now, right now, of course, you have Yemen, you have Qatar, which have determined themselves to annihilate Israel. They're basically safe havens for Iranian troops. And you had more Iranian troops fire at our base in Iraq this last week. There's been almost exchange of fire every single day. You had rockets that almost hit near our embassy, but our Iron Dome batteries took them out. In the midst of all that, you still have troops on the northern part of Israel, on the Golan, where Lebanon was basically trying to come into northern Israel, and Israel completely shut that down. And then if you move down a little bit further from the northern part of Israel, you had troops that were trying to come over on the midpoint of the Golan into Israel. So Israel's basically facing all these crazy thought patterns all around it. With that, you had Turkey going crazy over the deal with the United Arab Emirates. So I love quoting what the papers are saying every single week. Secular papers are saying about Turkey, they're aligning themselves to attack Israel and to wipe Israel off the map. Erdogan said again, we will ascend unto the Temple Mount and take the Temple Mount from the Jews. Why is that a big deal? The Palestinians even were trying to come out with something so harsh, saying United Arab Emirates can't even come up on the Temple Mount right now because they made peace with Israel. Watch, Saudi Arabia will do it soon. They said this week they won't make peace with Israel until there's peace with the Palestinians. But man, looks like there's a new Abrahamic thought pattern for the Middle East. And it looks like the French President Macron came in and said, okay, there won't be peace with the Palestinians till we have a two-state solution. So a lot of things are happening behind the scenes that are amazingly pointing to Jesus coming back. You had rabbis this week inspecting off-site a red heifer so it could be ready for the third temple sacrifices. So man, behind the scenes, you got rabbis ready for sacrifice. You got nations that are falling into position for the Ezekiel 38 war. And Israel looks like they're not going to have an election now for a while. They were looking like the last couple of weeks they're going to force elections. There's just too much things that are strategic for the nation itself to go into that again. So we're so blessed that we can see all these things that the Bible said you'd see. just before he returns. So what do? We go to the Scriptures. Scripture is so full of verses, verse after verse after verse, showing us what it would look like. So Jesus said you'd lift your heads up, that you would not be downtrodden. So he wants you to be filled with joy and filled with expectancy. So number one, Israel made a nation. Number two, Jerusalem won back. Jesus said the generation that sees those two will not pass away till all is fulfilled. So how amazing to have events happen in our lifetime that Jesus tied to the group that sees those two events will not pass away till the King comes. But you have many more. You have the Hebrew language restored. You got the Ethiopian Jews brought back. You've got the fertility of the land of Israel. You have the revival of the Roman Empire. You have 172 different species of predatory birds showing up on the land. Now, there's several things that have happened just in the last few months that are crazy. You had foxes show up on the Temple Mount. That's Lamentations 5:18. And then you had the ritual baths around the Temple Mount fill up with water. First time in 2,000 years. You had fish show up in the Dead Sea. That was prophesied 2,500 years ago, that just before the Messiah comes, that would happen. So you got birds in position, you got fish in position, you got the Temple Mount Institute in position, ready to have sacrifices. Pretty crazy to have all of it literally right in front of our face, screaming to us, Jesus is just about to come back. I really like the one with Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri. I don't really quote rabbis very often, but he'd come to accept Jesus as his Savior. Jesus appeared to him, freaked him out. He accepted Jesus as the Messiah and said, hey, I'm going to write a letter. I don't want it open until a year after I've died. Well, a year after he died, they opened the letter, and the letter said, I've come to know Jesus as the Messiah. Freaked all the rabbis out. But I like the letter he wrote with that. He prophesied a little bit in 2005 that just before the coming of the Lord, Israel would be ruled by two Benjamins. So 4 weeks ago, you had Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Gantz jointly come together to rule Israel. So pretty wild. You have certain things said, and then you see it come to pass in your lifetime. We're so blessed because of that. So you have all those signs, many more signs. Men will be lovers themselves with selfie sticks, tons of tangible physical things, the fertility of the land of Israel. It just preaches how close we are to the coming of the Lord. But then you got signals. You got blood red moons on Passover and Tabernacles. That's crazy. You have the Bethlehem star. The blood red moon's amazing to have 4 in a row on Passover and Tabernacles. That's called a tetrad. When's the last time we had 4 in a row like that on Passover and Tabernacles? 1967 when Jerusalem was won back. 1948 when Israel's made a nation. 1492 the edict of expulsion when the Jews were kicked out of Spain. Pretty wild. I hear people say, well, that day and that hour no man knows. Jesus was basically telling them code, I'm coming back for you on Feast of Trumpets. Because that was the 29.5th day of the month, and it was a 3-day period. It was on the new moon, so the Sanhedrin would send 2 witnesses out and tell them when they saw the new moon. When Jesus said of that day and that hour no man knows, he was telling them code for, I'm coming back for you on Feast of Trumpets. And then the craziest thing about that is you had the Bethlehem star this last year. You have our president. Think about this, how crazy it is about President Trump. Midway through his presidency, there was a blood red moon, wolf moon, supermoon, January 21st of his midterm. When Trump was born, there was a blood red moon. 700 days later, Israel's made a nation. When Trump was elected, Benjamin Netanyahu had been in office 7 years, 7 months, 7 days. When Trump was inaugurated, he was 70 years old, 7 months, 7 days. Moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem after 70 years. That's crazy. This is the crazy part. When you say the President of the United States and the Vice President's name, Trump and Pence, trumpets, that's when Jesus is coming back on the Feast of Trumpets. Their names mean the coming of the Lord. That's crazy. Who would have thought that 25 years ago that the President's name would mean the coming of the Lord? Well, we're blessed. What do? Help our local church, help our local pastor, get the message out. Jesus is just about to come. Man, the protocol for seeing the King face to face. So soon we'll see him. He wants you filled with joy, wants you filled with strength. He loves you so much. He wants us to be completely well informed about how near we are to seeing him face to face. Man, we'll pick up next week and see what all happens around Israel. So many things keep happening. It's just crazy. We're so blessed, though. Have a great Wednesday. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at the End of Days Update. If you'd like to be notified every time there's a new post, just go to the EDU at josephmorris.com and subscribe to receive email alerts. If these posts and updates have been a blessing to you, please consider making a one-time donation to help get the message out, or even becoming a monthly partner with Joseph Morris Ministries. Thanks again for tuning in to the EDU, and we'll see you next week.